Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. Sylvia, is it okay if I get started?
Please.
Yes, please.
Great. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Scott Kennedy. I'm the Chief of Staff and the Vice President of the Council on Foundations. And I want to thank you all for being here today for this conversation. I also want to thank Philea for hosting this webinar, and also to our incredible speakers that are here for sharing their expertise. As we gather on the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the philanthropic response to the war. Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, we've seen philanthropies engage in work to support widespread recovery, relief, and rebuilding efforts. Immediately after the invasion, we saw philanthropy turn out in force to learn how they could support relief efforts. Over 550 attendees joined an urgent webinar we hosted in partnership with the US State Department, Office of Global Partnerships, and the philanthropic community. And since then, we have continued to ensure the effective philanthropic support reaches Ukraine by providing information and access to expert counsel through webinars, roundtable discussions, peer-to-peer calls, and advocacy efforts. We also continue to track the response funds that are available through various local, state, regional, and philanthropic institutions, along with the list of organizations that are responding directly. None of this work would be possible without trusted partners, and we at the Council are really grateful to work in close partnership with Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, Community Foundations of Canada, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and of course, Philea. So on the anniversary of the invasion, we continue to stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, alongside Philea and obviously other organizations. And despite the solemnity of the situation, remain encouraged by philanthropy's efforts to support immediate response and sustained collaboration for long-term recovery and resilience. And together, let's hope that we can continue to make differences in the lives of those affected by this crisis. Delphine, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to all of you for being here. My name is Delphine. I'm the CEO of Philea, the Philanthropy Europe Association. And today, indeed, we are coming together to commemorate an anniversary which we had never wanted to commemorate, the anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which has come at the detriment of thousands of men, women, and children. It's an anniversary that calls upon all of us to reflect about solidarity and humanity in very dark hours. And as Kristen shared, philanthropy has come together to support communities affected since the war broke. In Europe as well, we have gathered our communities, brought them together to support, and globally Candid tracked that over $1.7 billion worth of grants and $1.2 billion worth of pledges have been made to support both in the humanitarian relief needed in the first hours, as well as for longer term recovery. And as we believe this support is of importance, not only for Ukrainians and for Europeans, but for all of those who believe in sovereignty, in international law, in democratic values, we are grateful for the collaboration with our partners, including the Council of Foundations, and all of you who believe in the value of building bridges for a better world. So today's annual State of the Nation of Vladimir Putin reminded us that while the war is less present in mainstream media today than it was 2 years ago, the need to sustain the exceptional resilience of Ukrainian populations in this highly asymmetrical war is of more importance than ever. In our conversation today, we will hear from 3 exceptional speakers, and I'd like to thank them warmly for being here with us today, as they will help us reflect upon how philanthropy can continue and improve the relevance, effectiveness, and intentionality of its support. We will hear from Yuliya Tychkivska, apologies for the pronunciation, who is the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Kiev. Yuliya is a co-founder of Bendukidze Free Market Center. She has served as the Vice President at Kiev School of Economics, is a civic activist in Ukraine, and founder of the Open University of Maidan. In 2018, she was selected by Forbes as a top 30 under 30 in Europe in law and policy fields for her role in building civil society in Ukraine. Thank you for being here with us today, Yuliya. We also have as a speaker Ondřej, the Regional Director Europe at Porticus, a global philanthropic entity and valued member of Philea. Ondřej has previously served as Minister of Education in the Czech Republic, as well as worked in various civil society organizations, think tanks, public institutions, philanthropists, and social entrepreneurs to advocate for open, inclusive, and sustainable societies. Then we have also Professor Timothy Snyder, Professor of History at Yale University and Permanent Fellow at the Institute for Human Science in Vienna. Professor Snyder has published many widely acclaimed books on nationalism, on Marxism, on Central Europe, on the Holocaust, on Russia, on the war, and much more. And he has earned more awards and recognitions than I'd be able to quote here in the short time available, and is currently also working on a highly anticipated philosophical exploration on the concept of freedom. We will hear from those three speakers, after which we will have time for conversation and for questions to the speakers. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or to raise your hand at the end of the keynotes. And towards the end of this meeting, we will have a wrap up and a number of takeaways by Nick from the Mott Foundation. And with that, I'd like to also thank the Mott Foundation for being a partner in organizing this event. So without further ado, let me pass on to Yuliya, and thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Delphine, for your introductory remarks. Thank you for gathering all these fantastic people today. As Ukrainian, on behalf of the whole nation, I'm really grateful for everyone for your support. The war is here. The war is in Ukraine. And just last month was pretty tough personally. Very briefly we'll share, because the windows of my apartment in Kyiv was damaged by the blast of a missile which landed just in Arsenalna, that's a city center of Kyiv. So the 6 windows from one side in our floor are completely broken. And almost for a year and a half ago, my husband, he volunteered to serve in Marine Corps, and he got his injury last autumn, and also last month he needed to have a surgery. He got it in the US due to his injury in there. So I personally feel and experience in different ways the war, as many Ukrainians, and we really are very grateful for the whole support we have globally, and we feel it, we appreciate it. So I'll very briefly start with overview from economical, social, and political perspectives. What is going on in the ground? Probably some information, I will try to be brief so you could ask some questions afterwards. So first of all, as we already stated, so I want to underline that as Ukrainians, we met with a genocidal attempt, which now is even more clear than 2 years ago. And the terrible goal is not continuously and constantly repeated by Russian officials, Russian propagandists and activists, but it's been consistently proved by Russian troops who fully demolish Ukrainian cities, who repress our prisoners, who continuously conduct repressions against Ukrainians on occupied territories, and innumerable war crimes. We see proves that as well. If I move more to economic perspective, so Ukraine, of course, faces a challenging period ahead. Like last 2 years, the country's GDP showed slight recovery in 2023, growing by estimate like 5.5%. After a sharp decline in 2022. But we all understand that this growth comes from a very low base, and the economy remains about quarter smaller than before the war. What we see from Ukraine's budget for 2024, of course, we emphasize defense spending, which is over half of our total expenses, which demonstrates the ongoing prioritization of course security. From another perspective, state apparatus, including social security, including healthcare, requires substantial international financial support. And the international community's role remains pivotal, but with a new perspective, the effort to utilize frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine's reconstruction, making it makes a novel approach to secure the necessary funds for recovery. And this Russian frozen assets, which I think is very important for all of us to understand, as that we must move forward with this approximately 300 billions of euros of Russian central bank assets, which are frozen despite all the complexity with legal and police and political frameworks. So socially, the situation is challenging as well. From one perspective, we see that society is exhausted. All of us, we are exhausted, burned out a bit. But same time, according to sociological surveys, as well as my personal perception, because we as Aspen Institute, we work with leaders from different areas, and just 2 weeks, probably it was 2 weeks ago, on February 3rd, we gathered 150 top leaders of Ukrainian society for unpublic forum, where we were trying to synchronize and align. We convened like top entrepreneurs, capital holders, as well as ministers, as well as civil society activists and leaders, as well as media representatives, as well as veterans and serving military leaders. So it resonates as well that unity and focus on victory remains. The belief in victory is here, despite all the exhaustions we go through. The basis for the stability in society is horizontal connections and informal organizations support for the army. Just last week, the Ukrainian society gathered 323 millions of Ukrainian hryvnias, which equals not that impressive number, $8.5 million US in 36 hours. So the communication was made through United 24 just within Ukrainian society, despite being really poor. And we see it economically, from economic perspective, people are very dedicated to support armed forces. So do everything possible, and it's really inspires. That's how we inspire each other, and that shows us resilience and determination within the victory we fight for. From societal perspective, few more things I'd like to emphasize. We see that we as society are moving to, nicely called in that forum I mentioned, a human-centered militarization approach. We do, as a society, value human life as core value, the most important value. So, but we also understand that we need to make sure each of us are centralized, militarized as well. We have almost 5 million Ukrainians abroad. Each Ukrainian matter. That's incredibly important to keep everyone engaged. We see that critical need for social transformation in terms of increasing demand for resilience, as I mentioned, but in personal level and collective level, we need to sustain ourselves as society for a long term. And gladly, more and more people understand that it's not a short run, it's a marathon we are running, and this resilience is essential. One of the challenges we face is a pressing need for reliable and trustful communication, especially between the government and society as a whole. But just recent events when President Zelensky shared about the tragic loss of 31,000 of Ukrainian soldiers, not including those who are missing or those who've been wounded and are not able to fight. But even this moment of sharp honesty make a significant step in bringing the information gap and fostering a deep and authentic dialogue between government and its people. And very briefly, political perspective, how I see it, and that's fascinating to have Tim Snyder here. He analyzed a lot of processes very deeply from historical and anthropological perspective, so it would be interesting to listen to him as well. But as I see here, so of course, number one challenge we as a society face is how do we strike a deliberate balance between the urgent demand of national security and unwavering commitment to our democratic principles. Of course, we understand that martial law puts some restrictions of freedoms, but we are in search of the new model. How do we balance that? I cannot stress enough the importance of bolstering the role of our parliament and Verkhovna Rada and our local governments. These bodies have become absolutely crucial during the first stage of war, and they do have trust from the society and community. So their capacity to maintain this trust of our citizens is a cornerstone for this national resilience I mentioned. We do work on reinventing the mechanism of our government accountability and transparency, ensuring high competence and integrity of our public services, further prevention of corruption, developing a new economic framework, and probably last thing I'd like to mention is we also are deeply committed politically and individually in different levels to diplomacy and fostering cooperation with our international allies. So building this platform of fair, trustworthy, honest dialogue is important, despite all the tiredness and exhaustion we see. We do need to keep the world informed what's going on as more and more people understand the existential value and existential threats which this war stayed before in front of the whole world. So I will probably sum up here with this question which lies heavily on my heart and mind, and which is discussed within our leadership community in Ukraine as well. So if we were to be erased as a sovereign state and nation, what will happen next? Will it make our democracies stronger? Will it make our markets prosper? Will it make our world a better and safer place? What will happen next? And I know people who are here, they are strong supporters. And once again, I'm so grateful for each and every one of you for standing with Ukraine, for standing with us in this fight for world's freedom and dignity. And at the same time, these questions are essential, and we need to ask them to those who are not standing behind next to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuliya. Thank you for sharing your personal perspective as well as a social, economic, and political perspective on the situation in Ukraine. We all understood the emphasis that you put on the need for communication, for social security, for healthcare, the importance of moving forward with the frozen Russian assets, the importance of human-central militarization, the role of the parliaments and the local governments, and the importance of cooperation and international diplomacy. Words that stood out for me in your presentation include the fact that, yes, society is exhausted, you are exhausted, and I think we all feel and understand and empathize with that, but that you're also all united and focused on victory, that resilience is a determination, and that every Ukrainian matters. I'm sure that the questions you asked at the end of your talk will resonate with Ondřej, and with this I'd like to pass on to Ondřej. Thank you, Yuliya, and thank you, Ondřej.
Thank you, Yuliya, and thank you, Delphine. Thank you very much for the invitation to contribute to our discussion today. I do not take it for granted that we are here and this topic still draws our interest. In the last 2 years, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we have been both profoundly changed by the conflict and at the same time run into the danger of becoming numb to it, not registering in its immediacy and giving way to fatigue as other political conflicts jostle for our attention. Even as Europe has come together more strongly than ever before, with NATO expanding and moves to create a security commissioner, potentially with the new commission, and perhaps strengthening the European military capabilities, the support for Ukraine is beginning to change, and we all see it. We see it across Europe. We see it even among the countries with the strongest support. I'm sure many of you have seen the polls, the recent polls, where at the same time last year, the majority of Europeans were confident that Ukraine can defeat the Russian aggressor and regain the country within its borders. Now this has dramatically changed and shifted to a minority of Europeans. We see politicians mobilizing help. Where is the constituency disappearing? There are fewer and fewer citizens across Europe who are willing to support bold packages, military, financial, etc. So where is the role of civil society, and where is the role of philanthropy here? And what have we learned together in the past 2 years? At the same time, Ukraine's struggle is becoming more and more desperate. Meanwhile, 3.7 million people are displaced internally. 1/3 of children are attending classes. Only 1/3 of children are attending classes entirely in person. I mean, you know all these details. So what we also know, despite all these dramatic facts, is that Ukraine has responded to the crisis astonishingly. And the civil society has become the heart of Ukrainian society, the heart of the nation, as the President Zelensky has put it. The role of civil society has saved millions of euros thanks to the scrutiny and accountability, even in these difficult times, has played a massive role in making the aid being provided to Ukrainian society way more efficient than it would have been without. We are also aware that the war has challenged and spurred development and innovation in an extremely rapid way. If we look at the donors, how philanthropy in Europe reacted, I'm sure many of you who are present in this call today have been working with the Ukrainian civil society even in the previous years. But the strategies of many foundations in Europe have been to mobilize in a very fast manner the emergency and humanitarian aid in the first place, and then, especially during last year, moved towards other kinds of help that goes beyond reconstruction of infrastructure, mostly towards education, psychosocial support, and other very important areas. Now, what I would like to ask ourselves today is whether we are able to listen carefully to the needs and to the voices of Ukrainian civil society. And sometimes I have the feeling, although there is a lot of effort present, we still have to make the effort more stronger. I've seen, and maybe you did too, at the anniversary of the second anniversary of the war, I went to some demonstrations in the European capitals, and what I saw was shocking. There were only a couple of hundreds of people. Those who were present were Ukrainian refugees living in those countries. So the public attention is really fading away. So I think the role of us all is, in the first place, to keep creating space for Ukrainian voice wherever we can, be it on policy level, be it with the governments, be it in our the events that you or your partners organize. There is never enough of that. And also looking at this from the perspective of our Ukrainian friends and colleagues, they basically are under two kinds of pressures. They wage war against the Russian military, but there's also a war for attention, and we have to support them in both our governments, to push our governments to provide the security and military support, but also create enough space to hear the Ukrainian voices. And I'd like to use the remaining time I have only to share 3 or 4 brief points what we hear from our Ukrainian partners. And they will all sound way too familiar to all of you, but I still take the time and mention them. They ask us, all of us, the European Philanthropy, to spread our philanthropy to the grassroots, go as far as possible. There are volunteers who even go to the buffer zones and even to places that are already occupied, and they are able to work them, provide support. If they are able to go the extra mile, we should be too. Let's give in the long term. None of us can see where the end of the war is. We all hope for peremoga, for the final victory and having full integrity of Ukraine. But we have to adapt. We have to be flexible, and that's the third point. Let's give flexibility. It's not there are rules can be broken, but principles stay. So let's give along principles and make the rules flexible as possible to allow for as much resilience as possible. And maybe the last point, give empathically. That's what we are also called for. Sometimes we can hardly imagine what the needs are, so let's listen even more carefully. And as one of the Catholic bishops of Ukraine coined it, if Ukraine is a battlefield and a lab, then there is not only a lot to fight for, but also to learn a lot from. And I'd like to encourage all of us to keep listening, stay open, learn, and remain flexible to support the Ukrainian civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ondřej, for these words. Thank you for sharing how, while Ukrainian civil society has shown indeed exceptional grit and has stepped up to be the heart of Ukrainian society, there are concerns around how the support for Ukraine among Europeans is indeed winding down, how the confidence among European constituencies is decreasing, and the need for European civil society and philanthropy to step up, keeping the space open for the voices of Ukrainians. And to end with your call for action, support the grassroots, support long-term, support flexibly, and give empathically. Thank you, Ondřej. On these words, I'd like to pass on to Professor Tim Snyder. Thank you for being with us, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be with you. It's been remarkable to see how quickly philanthropy in North America and in Europe has been able to pivot. And I think there's a very special conjuncture between the special role of Ukrainian civil society and the more flexible among the philanthropists out there. And in a small way, I've been able to see that at work, and I'm very grateful. I've been asked to speak about 2 things. I've been asked to speak about American sentiment towards the war, and I've been asked to speak about the overall geopolitical position. So American sentiment is a slightly tricky question. I just came back from the Munich Security Council a week or so ago, and people said, well, everyone is despondent or everyone is depressed. And that's not exactly right. What one finds instead is that the melancholy and the depression is a kind of average. The American elite is actually pretty sound on this issue overall, and American public opinion is pretty sound on this issue too. And there is a majority force for passing aid to Ukraine in both houses of the American Congress. At the same time, we have a very organized minority in the House of Representatives led by the Speaker of the House, who in turn is clearly following the instructions of Donald Trump. And that organized minority has, for the last 4 or 5 months, prevented the United States from passing aid. So we have this weird combination of a public opinion, which is actually not so bad, an elite opinion, which is pretty good, but a systemic problem, which hopefully we'll be able to overcome. But to be clear about this, the systemic problem, the weird voting rules and procedures that we have in the US Parliament are being exploited by a person, Donald Trump, who very clearly wants Ukraine to lose. There ought to be no doubt about that. I mean, whether this is because he wants Biden to have a defeat, whether it's because he just sympathizes with Putin, whether because he thinks he's in a deal with Putin to help Putin, to have Putin help him win the American elections, whatever the motivation is, it's 100% clear that we have this presidential candidate who's exerting untoward and unprecedented influence on our policy at this critical time. So that's the first point. Second point has to do with the stakes of the war. And it's important to me, and here this is a bit in the spirit of what Ondřej was saying, it's important to me that when we talk about the stakes of the war, we talk about it in terms of what Ukrainians are already doing for us. Because outside of the little circle that we're in now, in general, this conversation begins by talking about all the things that we think we're doing for the Ukrainians. But the geopolitical stakes and the moral stakes really have to do with the things that Ukrainians are already doing for us and have been doing for us for 2 years or for 10 years, depending upon how you're counting. So for me, there would be 5 or 6 major points here. Number one is order as such. When Russia attacks Ukraine, Russia is attacking the international order of the post-war period. It's trying to change that international order into a matter of power, spectacle, and propaganda. A second major point would be the spirit and the reality of democracy. It's not that common for an autocracy to try to destroy democracy by force. In the last several decades, that has not been normal. I think what we're seeing is a kind of peak in this process in which democracy is in retreat, autocracy is in advance, and we've reached the moment where an autocracy physically attacks a democracy. Though that's a reason why Ukraine has to win. A third geopolitical point is NATO. So if you're in the West, you've been raised with a concern that there would be a war in Europe. The Ukrainians are now absorbing, carrying out the entirety of that war themselves with financial and military assistance from outside, but they're the ones who are doing it. So in other words, the Third World War, which many of us were raised to expect, is actually taking place, but it's taking place only with Ukrainians doing all the fighting, right? All of the fighting. The fourth major point would be China. That in Washington, D.C., at least for the last 15 years or so, the main concern about a major world conflict was China carrying out offensive operations in the Pacific. The fact that Russia has been held back so far in Ukraine, I think, has made that much less likely. Should Russia win, I think concerns about China will quite properly rise again. Next point, a little bit under the surface, but I think very important. In a longer term in the 21st century, whether we get through is going to depend upon the balance of power between the hydrocarbon oligarchs who lie about global warming and generate conflict, and those of us who tell the truth about science and seek after alternative sources of fuels. One identity that Vladimir Putin has is as the most important hydrocarbon oligarch. And this war that he's fighting against Ukraine is an example of what happens when a hydrocarbon oligarch gets to do what he pleases. Final point, again, a little bit under the surface, but I think incredibly important. Another doomsday scenario for us as humans in the 21st century is the digital overcoming the human. That in one way or another, by way of the algorithms, by way of AI, by way of our own bad habits and weakness, we lose the basic habits of decency which allow us to have civil society and democracy, urged on in that negative direction by the machines. In this war, the Russians are, of course, trying that, as they did in 2014. But the Ukrainians have shown how human bravery, human communication, and also a certain playful use of the internet can work against all of that. The final point, and the underlying point for me, is the ethical against the cynical. And I trust this is important for everyone else as well. Russia is fighting this war on the basis of systematic lying. And its allies tend to be people who are also engaged in systematic lying. The parts of the American political spectrum who are in favor of Russia are also engaged in systematic lying, determined lying, on the basis that there is no truth, either empirical or ethical. There just is no truth. That view is entirely inconsistent with democracy. It's entirely inconsistent with human rights. And fundamentally, I think what the Ukrainians are helping us to do is to recognize that there's a world in which people are willing to take risks for things that are true, both true empirically and true ethically. And if we lose this war, if we let the Ukrainians lose, I feel we'll lose a huge part of our souls, to use an old-fashioned word in that sense. That if we let them lose, we will be giving up, or we will be demoralized. We'll find it harder to hold on to the sense that some things are truer than others and some things are better than others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Snyder. So very inspired to hear how in the US, indeed, public opinion, elite opinion is on the side of Ukrainians, and equally worried about the fact, as you mentioned, that an organized minority is following Donald Trump with very important consequences for us to keep in mind. And thank you for reminding us of what Ukrainians are already doing geopolitically and morally for us in the fight in favor of order, democracy, NATO, helping us understand the situation with regard to China, hydrocarbon, and a digital evolution. An ethical against a cynical approach. And maybe as I have the floor, I'd like to ask you a first question, if I may, and I'd invite everyone to raise their hands or share a question in the chat. You have in previous engagements also spoken about how the war of Russia against Ukraine is a war of hopelessness against hope. And I was wondering whether you could share a few notes about that, and also tell us how you see philanthropy can actually contribute to keeping that hope alive.
Mm. Well, hopelessness against hope is a different way of saying, maybe a better way of saying what I was trying to say at the end, that the Russian politics is organized around the lack of a future. There is no future in Russian politics. Putin has no discourse about the future at all. He has a discourse about the 9th century, which is laughably wrong, but he has no discourse about the future. The people who are fighting the war in Ukraine on the Russian side don't have a vision of the future. What they are, and when I listen to Ukrainians, and I take Ondřej's point about this, and I try to listen when I'm there, their reaction to the Russian invasion has to do with Russia getting in the way of things getting better. That without this, things would have gotten better. That what we want is a better future. We think we could have a better future for our children and our grandchildren in a very human way, right? And I think a lot of the other things that we take as good depend upon a sense that there can be a future. And I think the Russian war is against that. It's against the sense that there can be a future. Everything has to be the way it is. The oligarchs have to have all the money. Might makes right. That's it. No point thinking about how things might be better. As far as philanthropy, I mean, it's absolutely clear that, especially when it does get down to the grassroots, it has been life-changing. There are a whole, and so in my little sector, one thing I have seen is that by helping the right people, again, to use Ondřej's word, voice, by helping the right people, we've made sure that quite a few Ukrainians, rather than being, handlers and fixers for Westerners, have the opportunity through their art, through their journalism, through whatever their discipline or profession might be, to carry their own concepts to us. And that, although this could be done much better, and we have to work on it consciously, as Ondřej says, this has been much better this time around since 2022 than it was when Russia first invaded in 2014. So that's one thing that I've certainly noticed, is empowering the people who already had the languages, already had the concepts, already had the ideas, but who without philanthropic support in this critical moment wouldn't have that de facto voice which reaches beyond Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Ondřej, I see you nodding. Would you like to add anything?
The nodding was a sign of strong consent. So absolutely. And I also already see some of colleagues in the call reacting to what has been said. So there is maybe one thing that I'd like to react to what's in the chat box, whether there are any kind of platforms or already beaten paths of cooperation. So that's something that I left out of my contribution, but it's definitely worth of mentioning, is that I also have seen, and I guess many of you would agree to that, there has been a honest effort to coordinate, approach each other in the philanthropy ecosystem, finding new ways how to work, how to learn fast from each other. So, for example, Porticus, who's been active in Ukraine for more than 20 years, we've been approached by many colleagues and peers, and I've seen it also with other foundations that they were able to open up their knowledge, their networks, and join forces. So, but I still see actually that it can be done in a even more better, broader, faster way, without actually institutionalizing or formalizing that. And that's something positive that I have observed, and I would like to see it coming also in other areas of work, because in case of Ukraine, it's not only about catering or providing support to the needs of the Ukrainian civil society, but there are other topics that many European and North American foundations are anyway, or have been anyway, working on, be it climate change, be it low carbon, zero carbon reconstruction technologies, the transfer of technologies, but also bringing the best knowledge of psychosocial support infrastructure and methods to the ground, and combined with the subsidiarity principle that I also haven't mentioned that much, but I think has become an absolutely not as a feature. To call it a feature is too little. It has become the core method and attitude of the Ukrainian civil society that keeps it so efficient and so impactful in these difficult times. So we can learn a lot from that. And I think the responsibility of us as philanthropy representatives is also to support exactly that kind of collaborative culture.
Thank you so much. Indeed, collaboration, and I think making sure that as philanthropists we understand, continue to listen to those on the ground, to civil society, and see where the needs are, echoes very well with what we've heard in this community before. We have a question also from Katie Hultquist, who is asking about how philanthropy is reaching or is not reaching the marginalized groups that are often left behind during conflict. Maybe I'd like to suggest that, Yuliya, if you would like to say a few words about that from your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not an expert of philanthropy and philanthropic market. However, I really understand very well how Ukrainian society is operating and how we address this challenges. And as was already discussed, our biggest strength is our civil society. We mobilize, we build, we pivot all the time. We build new structures. We address the urgent issues very fast, and I think that's really our core competence as a society. So there are lots of organizations which address specific issues, specific topics, specific challenges, and we as Aspen, we as a leadership platform, we know lots of leaders of such organizations. So my contacts are available. I'm very open. If any of you is interested on any specific topic, veterans, minority, I don't know, educational losses, civic education, I would be more than happy to connect you directly with the leaders of the organizations who are reliable, who are transparent, accountable, absolutely integrated, so-called, and I would be happy to connect you so you could contribute directly to the cause. That's what I could offer, and I'm very open to do that.
Thank you so much, Yuliya. I think that's well heard by the audience. I'd like to pass on to Stanislav Kutsenko. Stanislav, you have your hand raised. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Stanislav Kutsenko. I'm acting director of Europe Prehistok. It's French-based initiative that helps children. I'm based in Kyiv and also work in Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. So actually, I want to pay attention to the question of children in Ukraine and situation with them, because it's a pity, but we have a lot of children that have at least one parent now or both parents that died because of military aggression. And actually, Europe Prehistok, since 2022, organized trips, retreat trips to France for children from different regions of Ukraine. And actually, children are always happy when they just have a possibility to escape from realities in Ukraine, because they are sometimes from small villages and never left even the borders of their region, their native region. So I mean that it is important to discuss not only development of civil society and support of adults in Ukraine, but also children. And I'm happy that we have such an opportunity. Now we plan to expand also to Germany, to Belgium, to Ireland, in order to bring as many children as possible. And actually, my issue to discuss or to pay attention to, first of all, that philanthropists need to pay this attention to children, because they are growing generation of Ukraine, and for sure they will take the future of nation. It's first. And second, if the organizers are not against, I would like to leave my contacts, at least email, in this chat, if any potential partners are interested in such initiatives to help Ukrainian children. We would be grateful, because now the major donor of Europe Prehistok is Robert Bosch Foundation, and for sure we always want to expand, because we have a lot of towns, cities like Bucha, like Trostiana from Kharkivsky region, like Novomoskovsk and Dnipropetrovsk, as well as cities from Western Ukraine, where are a lot of IDP, internally displaced children, who moved with their families, or they are already orphans. We want to help them as well. So I would be grateful for any partnership. May I leave, please, my email, the chat?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stanislav. And what you're saying reminds me of an event that was organized recently by the Aspen Institute Kiev. So I'd like to go back to Yuliya again, where your Minister of Social Policy, Oksana Zelenovsky, stated that when we talk about war victims, we can say that this is 100% of the Ukrainian population. We've heard about children, we've heard about civil society. Would you like to maybe come in, Yuliya, and say a few words about what that means for us? What does it mean for philanthropy to take into account that we are talking about 100% of the Ukrainian population?
Oh, that's a very tough question. I do feel it in my skin that that of course it influences each and every of us. But for any question like this, and any question about how to support Ukraine or special cause of Ukraine, my first answer is help us arm our soldiers on the front line. That's the most important thing, number one. But I understand, of course, that many organizations cannot contribute to arming of our soldiers, which is number one priority. So I could identify a few areas which I think are priority areas in terms of supporting Ukrainian society. It's a long list, but I might miss something. But like, I think number one is rehabilitation of veterans. I don't like to say reintegration of veterans, because veterans were not anyhow reintegrated from the society. They are society. They like the most dedicated part of the society. I know it from personal perspective. It's really hard for people like my husband, when he was moved to Kiev to serve last months of his service before surgery, he really struggled to balance in a normality of Kiev's life compared to Donbass region. So a rehabilitation of veterans, very, very important. Civic education, I think that's essential thing. We want to change values, like one of my mentors mentions some time ago, like when we talk about values, we talk about not some declarations, we talk about mechanism, how we decide on specific issues. That's the way we act. And to change values, we need time and active steps in this area. So we need to invest in education today in order to have better society, better world in the future. I think it's number 2. Humanitarian demining, you all know, terrible situation. If we count our occupied territories, it's like the most mined land in the world. That's a big issue for people to be back homes. Number 4, probably I would state here social dialogue and cohesion. And number 5 and 6, I said I'll tell you 5, I'll tell you 6. Number 5 would be a cultural diplomacy. That's very important. I think culture is very important. Art is very important to support in different kind of in different ways, how like within society, Ukrainian society, within like internationally for Ukrainian artists. Number 6, how to support, like as a key area to support Ukrainian society and to contribute to fastest victory of Ukraine and democratic world. I would say informational front, maybe frontline is not the best word for us now to describe it, but anyway, informational direction, because we see how efficient the propaganda of Russia is, how much money they invest in it. And like we experience it every day, like just even within our Aspen Institute's network, like we conducted an event with our beloved friends in Mexico. And we had one of top 30 wealthiest Mexican entrepreneurs on a call, and he literally seriously asked us very like honestly, is it true that Ukrainians were doing the genocide in Donbass for that many years? And you see like, oh my God, is it like really happening after even 2 years since the full-scale invasion? I think it's very important to also work with critical thinking against misinformation. Sorry for taking longer, but I think that would be 6 areas I would recommend to support.
Thank you so much, Yuliya. That's really helpful. I'm sure it resonates with the audience today. We have maybe time for one more question, and unless there is anybody who raises his hand or her hand now, I'd like to maybe go back to Professor Snyder and bounce back off what you were saying, Yuliya, when you were talking about values. In your work, Professor Snyder, in your work on freedom in particular, you argue, in fact, that freedom, if I understand well, is a meta value, which allows us to make decisions about other virtues, such as loyalty, generosity, and solidarity. And I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure there's a much longer answer than what we're able to share now, but whether you feel that the invasion of Ukraine and the threats of Russia is actually a threat on the meta value of freedom, and if so, what does that mean for us as philanthropists?
That's a wonderful question, and I appreciate your citing to me the argument of a book which hasn't even been published yet. So that's amazing. Of course, the answer is yes, and I think this war is the war helps us to see just how significant freedom is, and maybe helps us to rescue freedom from the status of cliche, which I think it has in Western societies now. One thing that you notice about it is freedom of speech. That freedom of speech is not about the richest and most powerful person being able to dominate propaganda. Freedom of speech is about the ability of everyone to speak truth to power. And that's where the conversation has to start. So the person who doesn't own the social media platform, who decides to tell the truth about Russia, tell the truth with words or with their body by staying and doing the right thing, that's what freedom of speech is actually about. A second point has to do with the positive character of freedom. So people often tend to think, at least in the English-speaking world, that freedom is just about getting the government out of your way. But that's clearly not enough. And this is something that was brought home to me in deoccupied zones of Ukraine and in the things that Ukrainians themselves said. Yes, the zone has now been deoccupied, but there are other things one would have to do for people to be free, right? People have to have basic services. They have to be able to get to a road. They have to have access to healthcare and education and so on in order to be free. And so I think a lot of these categories that we've talked about, like education, for example, are usually not associated with freedom, but they ought to be. And then I think the third point is one which Ukrainians themselves articulate in a slightly different way, And that is what you were calling a meta value. That freedom is about this sort of unpredictability. It's about having a future. It's not, you don't know exactly what your kids and your grandkids are going to do, but you want to create a space where they can go out and do those things on their own, rather than being trapped in a world where aging oligarchical gerontocratic dictators force them to learn false things about the past and then repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So freedom has to do with that. It has to do with opening this time and space so that the generations to come can go out and do their own things, make their own mistakes, become their own unpredictable sorts of people. So those are all aspects of freedom, which I think the war, or rather Ukrainian resistance, helps to bring home.
Thank you so much, Professor Snyder. And as you can hear, I'm really looking forward to having the book, having heard you talk about it. So we're all very eager to that. Thank you. I would like to thank all of you, in particular, Yuliya, Tim, Ondřej, for these very inspiring words. And before we close, I have the pleasure of passing on to Nick, Nick from the Mott Foundation, who has been a great champion in making this event happen and is a great champion for Ukrainian altogether, to share some of his observations of what we're taking home from this conversation. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Delphine. We heard about the fatigue that's happening in Ukraine, but still remaining unity and resilience and determination. Civil society is still there. This offers that main horizontal connection, and it's a basis for stability in society. But all that is for naught if the country gets overrun, right? I think that it's up to us to remember the needs that are on the ground in Ukraine that were mentioned, but also to be making sure that we help our own societies in the West or wherever we might be around the world understand the true nature of this struggle. Professor Snyder so eloquently talked about that, and in particular, that this isn't just about what we should be doing for the Ukrainians, but reminding people what the Ukrainians are doing for us. And one of the things is that of helping to charter a better future, or indeed a future, where there already is, as I think Ondřej mentioned, there's a laboratory for innovation that is going on. There's so much opportunity to learn, and in a way of seeing Ukrainians charting their own course, leading to that kind of freedom, which Professor Snyder just mentioned. I think on a practical front for philanthropy, I'm taking for myself and for what our own foundation can do, but colleagues can as well, is that we do our best to reach the grassroots, that we do that in an empathetic and listening way, where we're not just driving some agenda which we think is best for Ukrainians, but they are the ones that are calling that forth for us. And to do that, we do need better platforms for cooperation. Both Philea and the Council have offered excellent starts. They do have resources up on their websites of organizations or programs that are in process. But I think we will need to do a little bit more organizing on the part of philanthropy to be able to align and ensure that our whatever assistance we can muster is delivered in a more effective way. So that, I think, is a challenge to philanthropy that I know we will work on. Delphine, Kristen from Philea and the Council, I very much, and your staffs that have helped set this up, I deeply appreciate it. And of course, our speakers, Yuliya, Timothy, Ondřej, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us.
Thank you so much, Nick. And let me also thank the Mott Foundation for supporting us and you personally. And again, a very warm thank you to Yuliya, Ondřej, and Tim. We've learned so much, we've been inspired, and I hope we all take away the messages that Nick has eloquently summarized for us. Thank you, and let's remember that each Ukrainian matters, and we're there to support. Thank you.